Those demonstrations continued on Pearl Roundabout. One opposition leader told the crowd they're setting an example for the world.
We are committed to peaceful protest, which succeeded in Tunisia and Egypt. You're presenting a model. Now the whole world is looking at you. It will also be like a new school. In Tunisia, in Tahrir Square, in Pearl Roundabout, a new school of peaceful protest and presenting demands.
One person has reportedly been killed and dozens injured in the latest violent clashes in Yemen. A medical official said one man was shot in the neck and killed. The country's interior ministry has denied that report. Anti-government protests began 9 days ago when at least 7 people were killed and more than 150 wounded. Riot police have also clashed again with anti-government protesters in Algeria's capital. Officers broke up a rally after thousands gathered in the centre of Algiers. Police disrupted a similar rally last week, which was organised to call for better living conditions and greater freedom. Government supporters have also been taking to the streets, adding to the tension.
We have a president. We are not against him. We are not against His Excellency, the President of the Republic.
How can she speak against the march? The president doesn't give us anything. He's a stealer. They're all stealers.
And police in Kuwait have fired tear gas at protesters described as stateless long-term residents. They're demanding citizenship, free education, healthcare and jobs, benefits that are available to all Kuwaiti nationals. Protesters sang the Kuwaiti anthem before being dispersed by tear gas. Calls for anti-government demonstrators are also starting to be heard in Morocco. The so-called 20th of February movement is planning rallies in 4 cities on Sunday, which it is billing as a day of dignity. The would-be demonstrations are being largely organised online and include promotional videos like this one. The organisers want King Mohammed to dissolve parliament, hold new elections and hand over some of his powers. It also wants him to give judges more independence. Calls too for demonstrations in Iran. An opposition movement there is urging protesters to return to the streets on Sunday and to fight against what it calls religious dictatorship. It's been a week since 2 people were killed in demonstrations in Tehran. Members of parliament then called for opposition leaders Mir Hussein Mousavi and Mehdi Karoubi to be executed for organising the rallies. They remain under house arrest. As the wave of demonstrations sweep through parts of North Africa and the Middle East, it's being watched closely by the West. The British Foreign Minister has criticised those governments that have used violence against the protesters.
The British government is deeply concerned by the unacceptable violence against protesters that has been happening in Libya and Yemen and Bahrain. And we remind all the governments in the region that it is important to respect the right to peaceful protest and not to use repression and violence against demonstrators. In Libya, we're particularly concerned about reports of heavy weapons fire against protesters and a sniper unit also being engaged. We've received reports of up to 35 bodies arriving at one hospital alone. These reports are horrifying, and we want to make clear to the Libyan government that just because there aren't television cameras present at the scenes that are going on in Libya, that does not mean that the world is not watching. That doesn't mean that the world is going to ignore the way in which protesters and demonstrators are treated.
Well, those protesters in Libya have been getting support from a coalition of demonstrators in the United States. Hundreds of Libyan Americans made their voices heard outside the White House on Saturday. AlJazeera's Kimberly Harkett was there.
Overwhelmed with emotion. As little by little, reports of fresh violence in Benghazi reached Libyan Americans in the United States. Hussein al-Shafi, a political refugee living in Washington, makes contact with his brother-in-law, who tells him protesters are being fired upon.
He said, people are dying, bodies thrown everywhere, shed blood everywhere, and they have no ambulance to take them to the hospital, to the emergency.
AlJazeera cannot confirm the authenticity of the reports, but phone conversations like this between Washington and Benghazi are repeated for hours as Libyan Americans gather in front of the White House to appeal for help in preventing bloodshed.
It is violence. This group of Libyan Americans says the White House is not doing enough to stop. That's why they're now calling on President Obama to use his position of power to help bring about change inside Libya.
Obama, you have to stand up. Mr. Obama, Libyans are getting massacred and killed.
The White House Friday did issue a written statement condemning the use of violence by governments against peaceful protesters. But these pro-democracy supporters say more must be done to push Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi to end his rule of more than 4 decades.
For 40 years of fear and viciousness and corruption and horrible violence, both psychologically and physically visited upon the Libyan people. We can't accept that, and we want them to condemn what they're seeing inside of Libya right now.
That is why these Libyan Americans say they will not surrender their hopes. They promise to keep the pressure on the White House until they are confident a free and democratic Libya can finally emerge.
Stop the killing, stop the hate!
Kimberly Helkett, AlJazeera, Washington.
The Egyptian Stock Exchange will remain shut on Sunday, marking 3 weeks of closure due to the country's political upheaval. But Egyptian officials say emergency laws will be lifted within 6 months, and proposals to amend the constitution are almost ready. Those are among the demands of pro-democracy campaigners who ousted President Mubarak more than a week ago. In the run-up to the Egyptian uprising, young activists used social networking sites, specifically Facebook, to call for the popular revolt against Mubarak's government. Now the country's military rulers are turning to the same tool, but to promote their own cause. From Cairo, Raria Rage reports.
They've been communicating with people on the streets, and now they've turned to the internet to win hearts and minds. Egypt's Supreme Military Council has set up its own Facebook page, the same tool young activists used to organize the revolution.
We have set up this page on the orders of the head of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, because the Council believes that fruitful cooperation with Egypt's honourable sons in the coming period will lead to stability and security in our beloved Egypt.
In under 48 hours, the page attracted more than 250,000 supporters, with thousands of comments on the statements posted by the council, ranging from praise for the army to echoing protesters' demands about the way forward. The military has been exerting efforts to appear open through televised communiques, but some experts have described this as old-fashioned 1960s-era communication style.
What Facebook does offer is the creation of a space where people can discuss these things. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a general, obviously, answering everyone's questions on Facebook. And I think for the army, it allows them to get a taste of what public opinion is concerned about, but also kind of channel the discussion. We need to get people to get back to work. We can't threaten the economy anymore. We will address your grievances, but be patient.
One of the more popular statements on the site announces the army will not be punishing an officer who was shown on television joining the uprising. Caught in the uncomfortable position of having to run the country, the new rulers are already making decisions that are proving unpopular, including calling for an end to strikes and street protests. Their latest PR move, some say, perhaps an attempt to